Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišak, and I work as the Deputy Head of Foreign Desk in Slovak Daily Pravda, which, by the way, means truth, and it's not Russian Pravda. Fighting corruption has strategic importance for Ukraine's national security. I believe this because when it comes to corruption in areas critical to national defense and security, we very often see that this corruption is not random, that people are not just there to steal some money. They do it because it serves Russian interests, explains Olena Tregub, Secretary General of NACO, the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission. We discussed the current high-profile corruption cases in Ukraine linked to the energy and defense sectors, but I also asked Olena what she would say to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Is he too close to people who are too close to corruption? Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. For the link, see also the description of this episode. And now, up to the new debate. Olena, first of all, I want to talk about the most recent developments regarding the fight against corruption in your country. But let me ask you also about the debate related to the peace plan for Ukraine. You, as a Ukrainian, how would you perceive a just peace for Ukraine?
Ukrainians want peace more than anybody else because it's actually their country being destroyed by Putin. And everybody desperately wants the war to stop. At the same time, if this is not peace but appeasement, which is opening gateway for even bigger war and even more horrible things from Russia in the future, then Ukrainians don't want this kind of peace. Because Ukrainians have children and Ukrainians think about how those kids will live in their own country. This is why now the nation is ready to sacrifice their own lives, their well-being today, so that in the future we have security. We know that Russia will not invade Ukraine again. In the future, we have European integration. Ukraine becomes part of EU. And also that Russia is held accountable for all the horrific crimes against Ukraine. And this is basically what we see as a dignified, just peace. It's not about territories. It's about existence and independence and freedom of Ukraine as a nation, as a state.
If I may, let's also talk a bit about you. While you were working in the government, you attempted to introduce various anti-corruption measures, which led to your dismissal in 2017 and later reinstatement by the court. What did you take away from the period in terms of how you can fight corruption in your country?
Essentially, before I worked for the government, I wasn't even that interested in the topic of anti-corruption. I was more interested in international relations, economic development. But once I found myself inside the Ukrainian government, I understood that fighting corruption has their strategic importance for Ukrainian national security, for geopolitical status, if you wish, of Ukraine in the future. Because I understood that corruption is inherited by Ukraine from former USSR and specifically from Ukrainian connection to Russia. And the mechanisms to run the state based on corruption, it's Russian mechanism. And if Ukraine wants to transform, Ukraine wants to become different and get away from Russia, Ukraine needs to fight corruption because that's the only way. And I saw myself how different actors inside the government who were involved in corruption, how little they cared actually about Ukraine as a state, Ukrainians, about independence. I saw how much those corrupt networks were based on some historical connection with the post-Soviet world, where all these corrupt people, they do business with each other, very much connected to Russia. And it was, for me, scary to see because I started worrying about the future of Ukraine and I became more interested in corruption. I became more interested in defense and security sector. That was my conclusion, basically, that the only way for Ukraine to become independent, we need to get rid of all these people who are corrupt because those people very often turn out to be also Russian agents, essentially. In my case, I saw several examples of this.
So if you look back, do those networks you saw when you have been working in the government, do those networks still exist?
Yes, I think they still exist. Yes. They are diminished significantly. And actually, a lot of people who were doing corruption in Ukraine after full-scale war, they actually live in Russia right now. They moved to Russia. Well, including the top guy, Ukrainian former President Yanukovych, he lives in Russia. And for example, the other person, Andriy Derkach, he used to be Ukrainian member of parliament. And he was there basically promoting Russian interest in Ukraine very aggressively through media, through business, through Russian Orthodox Church, because he was literally paying salaries for their Orthodox priests for like their anti-Ukrainian work. So this person, he's currently in Moscow. He is the member of the Senate, but he was part of the network which was now exposed by Anti-Corruption Bureau, where the corrupt money was laundered through basically his money laundering office, which he established kind of in between Russia and Ukraine, and his former associates. They were still employed by Ukrainian state-owned company Energoatom, for example. So that's just an example for you of how those networks, in a way, they crumbled because many people either left, like Derkach left, or some people are dead, like Portnov. He left and then he was, as you know, killed in Spain. So they became weaker. I hope so. They became weaker, but they are deeply rooted and there is so much more work to be done in order to completely get rid of them.
Now, how do people react to your work? I'm asking this because this is something I think I know also from my country, because we also have a problem with corruption. And some people are simply saying, we cannot do much about it. This is what we are. This is deeply rooted, as you mentioned. And of course, there are also some threats against people like you who are fighting corruption. So how do people react to your work?
Generally, Ukrainians react very well. Ukrainians, especially lately, especially during full-scale war, became very determined about fighting corruption. They basically understand that corruption costs lives right now, literally. If we don't protect energy, if we buy defective bulletproof vests, somebody will die. So they support my work. I hear a lot of good words from Ukrainians. Yes, there are some voices who say that it's impossible. Usually what people say, they say, oh, you have a lot of work, or like, you will be never out of work because corruption will never end. You will never be able to succeed and fulfill your mission. So I hear comments like that, but those comments, I wouldn't say they are justifying the fact that corruption will always stay there. They are just acknowledging the fact that it's probably hard to achieve some very strong positive result in fighting corruption in the near future right away. Takes time, probably. We see already that, for example, the younger generation of Ukrainian government officials are much less prone to corruption. They are much more principled, more professional. They don't have the Soviet legacy. They don't have any, friends in Russia or business partners in, Russia and all Belarus, all these countries. And so they are more oriented towards Brussels. They have friends in London or Paris, and it helps because they are a new generation. Usually I feel appreciation, and the only thing, of course, I understand that I also operate in the diplomatic arena. I have education actually in international law and diplomacy, so I worked at the UN. I work abroad a lot, but what I know that for me, for example, in order to engage and represent Ukrainian government on some higher level, The fact that I also do anti-corruption for many government officials, it's a red flag because they don't want anybody who is anti-corruption because it's better for them, they are not confident that they are not corrupt, I guess, just say it diplomatically. And that's why being anti-corruption person in Ukraine is not very rewarding when it comes to your career. It means that you will not be really invited to the top positions because they know that you're not, basically, you cannot be corrupted. That's why they keep you better on the outside orbit of their state governance.
We saw what happened this summer when Ukrainians had to take to the streets to support the independence of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO, which the government sought to weaken. In retrospect, how do you explain why the administration wanted to do this? And considering the politicians in Kiev, including President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, must have been aware that such an attempt would lead to criticism from Western partners, especially from Brussels.
Well, what happened, very simple. Their administration essentially had knowledge that anti-corruption bodies are doing investigation. And they had knowledge that the investigation got very close to their inner circle of Ukrainian president, his former business partner. And then basically people from the Zelenskyy inner circle, they offered this solution to neutralize the anti-corruption bodies, and Zelenskyy did agree on this and sign this off. However, they did not expect that society would be so determined about not letting this happen. They didn't expect that. It was probably like a shocking thing for them that so many people showed up, and there were a lot of arguments why people are protesting in the street if we are being currently bombed, if there is currently hot war, that people should stay at home. Yet they didn't stop people. And Zelenskyy is much more worried about not what European partners think, but what about Ukrainians think, Ukrainian people. And that's why it's a good thing that he cares about what Ukrainian people think. And it's a good thing that he essentially rolled back and he let the anti-corruption bodies do their work.
So would we be seeing the current wave of investigations, first of all linked to the Energoatom corruption case, if NABU had been weakened over the summer?
No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't see that. That's my opinion and my evaluation of the situation. I think that the fact that so many people stood up for anti-corruption bodies gave protection to those bodies to keep doing their work, and also gave mandate of trust and high expectations for those bodies to deliver matters a lot, because this is a political case. This case concerns like I said, there are people on the top level of the government. And it was important for those bodies and for everybody, for all actors, to see that actually anti-corruption bodies are supported by people. And there were a lot of, disinformation campaigns against anti-corruption bodies, including, for example, narrative that anti-corruption bodies are penetrated by Russian agents, and all these anti-corruption investigations are done to weaken Ukraine geopolitically. But those didn't work out at all. And the same people who are going to front line, the same people who support the war effort, the same people support anti-corruption bodies.
Of course, the whole Energoatom corruption case is a big thing. And at a time when Russia's ongoing assault makes keeping the energy sector functioning is so crucial for Ukraine, were you surprised by this case? Because there were clearly people who wanted to enrich themselves, even though doing so weakened Ukraine and endangered citizens.
Of course, Ukrainian society, and myself included, we were, disgusted and outraged about all those facts that were revealed. Especially, it was painful to listen to those tapes that NABU released. And those tapes, the recordings from their apartments where those corrupt deals were being made, they are part of their investigation. And it's not just that anti-corruption body released the tapes, but there were simultaneous concrete actions such as arrests, such as searches, such as court proceedings. And the anti-corruption bodies, they released those tapes just for society to understand what's going on, why they are arresting, why people are fleeing, like 2 people fled, Mindic and Zuckerman. But it's, of course, very hard for society, demoralizing to hear that people are discussing how they are, bringing kickbacks, cash bribes in bags, and how they, in those conversations, you clearly hear that these people, they don't care about you. All conversations that I heard on those tapes are in Russian language. Just one important detail, actually. 2 people implicated dual citizenship, Israeli and Ukrainian citizenship, and they already left Ukraine. So there are people connected to this Russian citizen, Derkach, his associates. So, of course, it's very clear that this is not just corruption, this is state treason. These people, they jeopardized Ukrainian security during war. They did not care whether our energy will be protected from Russian missile. And probably without this corruption, I don't say that we would be now without blackouts in Kiev, but probably we would have a little bit more hours of electricity during the day. That's why, of course, it's very big effect politically inside Ukraine. But at the same time, people who work in this field, including myself, we're happy it was revealed. Maybe the timing is not the best, and we wish it was revealed a bit earlier, not now during winter when there is increased pressure from US on Ukraine to basically capitulate. So the timing is pretty heavy. But the very good thing is that it is revealed. I was really happy that anti-corruption bodies showed that they can deliver, that they can fight top-level corruption, and that we were protecting them not in vain. That's very good, because these are Ukrainian people. Anti-corruption bodies, they are not controlled by USA, they are not controlled by Russia. They are controlled by Ukrainian men and women who want to fight corruption in their own country, and they are doing it. And it means that it's like immune system of the body trying to get rid of some disease. And it can be ugly, but it's much better than it's happening. It means Ukraine is not a corrupt country, but Ukraine is a country who is fighting corruption.
Olena, you mentioned people like Timur Mindic, and he's considered a close associate of President Zelenskyy and left the country just hours before his home was searched. If you would have a chance to talk to President Zelenskyy, what would you tell him? Would you warn him that he is maybe too close to people who are allegedly too close to corruption schemes, or what would you tell him?
I would tell him that right now you are the leader of Ukrainian nation during war, and you are democratically elected legitimate president. And if there are facts, investigations showing that people who are closest to you, even including your top manager, Andriy Yermak, who is the head of president's office, if they were involved in this Mindic case, you need to completely reboot your whole government, the way you govern the country. If you rely on several 5 managers, you need to change that. And you need to choose the side of Ukrainian people. People will support you. Even like if you acknowledge mistakes, if you acknowledge that your managers were involved in corruption, people will still support, and we will not have election during hot war. But you need to basically surrender essentially all your friends. Just like you said, before election, you very much liked to quote Lee Kuan Yew that you need to be ready to put your friends in jail. So do like Lee Kuan Yew, essentially.
Last 2 things, Olena, you mentioned this before, but in your social media post, you said that the security service of Ukraine must investigate this Energoatom case not only as corruption, but also as a potential act of Russian penetration aimed at degrading Ukraine's resilience and defense. All signs suggest that this may be exactly what happened. Why do you believe that?
I believe it because When it comes to corruption in areas critical for national defense and security, we see very often that this corruption is not random, that people are not just there to steal some money. It's not about the money sometimes at all. And I had a very rich experience with basically dealing with defense corruption. And over the years, I have observed a very typical pattern when there would be some group of people, some company who would offer some, say, weapons for Ukraine. Then we would do some corruption, conspiracy together with Ukrainian officials to sign some really bad contracts. And then they would just disappear and no weapons would be delivered. And the money will be gone, but the problem would be more with the fact that Ukraine would be left without weapons. And then if you analyze those cases, many of them actually turn out to be people who are not random. Those companies and people, they were basically hired by Russia in order to undermine Ukrainian defense capability. It's pretty simple and kind of intuitive even to understand why Russia would want to do that. In this particular case, Anti-Corruption Bureau says that, okay, they have materials about energy and defense. Materials about energy have been released, and this corruption undermined Ukrainian critical infrastructure, defense from missiles. And this is definitely in Russian direct interest because Russian task is to knock out Ukrainian energy system. So these people were helping Russia to knock down Ukrainian energy system. This is number one. It's a top Russian goal. And number two red flag is that it turns out that these people were also connected to Moscow and, like I said, to Moscow member of parliament. So it's like, if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck, it must be a duck because it's definitely a Russian interest. And when it comes to defense, those materials, they have not been released, but I just tell you hypothetically, if somebody organizes corruption scheme to fund some production of weapon for Ukraine that is supposed to seriously, defend Ukraine and change the balance on the battlefield, but then this weapon essentially turns out that it's all like a scam and this weapon doesn't really work. And Ukraine is not defended. So definitely this is some major Russian potential operation because this is perfect for Russia, that Ukraine would spend all the money they have to build some weapon and that weapon would not eventually work or that product wouldn't work that was procured. So like I said, it's very typical. So it directly undermines Ukraine in this war, makes Ukraine vulnerable. Also, super, super important that these matters are investigated not just by Anti-Corruption Bureau. Like I said, people don't do it for the money. Very often people do it because it's a Russian interest.
I would maybe add also another thing, what is favorable for Russians, because of course, with those schemes, they can weaken Ukrainian energy sector and defense sector, but such scandals also could affect European partner support for Ukraine. And of course, Russian propaganda will undoubtedly exploit them to the fullest. So are you concerned that more scandals like this can affect European partner support for Ukraine?
Definitely, we have seen that Russia propaganda weaponized the topic of corruption for many years already, claiming that Ukraine is the most corrupt country and you should not help Ukraine to defend itself because Ukraine is corrupt. Well, it didn't really work so far because Ukraine will be receiving assistance further, and the reaction of their partners in Europe that actually they also appreciate the work of anti-corruption bodies. It's not, it's not European partners, it's not American partners who basically came from outside and decided to audit Ukraine and found corruption. It's Ukraine itself found corruption within itself. So it's a self-correction action. So many partners are actually happy about it, and they understand it's good that there is a system in Ukraine. And that's why they said that their assistance will continue. The only here warning would be if Zelenskyy would take very wrong action of prosecuting not corrupt actors, but prosecuting those who investigate corruption, then I worry a lot about international support and assistance. But I hope Zelenskyy will not do that. I hope for the best. I think that Ukrainians, they are capable to defend the country from external aggression from Russia and be able to also clean our governance so that we become a strong country, European country and democratic country. And we already are such a country, but this is still a struggle ahead of us to move into the space where we want to be.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe, listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on the other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. For the link, see also the description of this episode. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.